Imagine you have $100,000 to invest. You have two choices. Choice 1, put it in the stock market. Watch the number go up and down every single day. Do absolutely nothing and let time work in your favor. Choice 2, buy a property instead. Use the $100,000 as a deposit. Borrow the rest from a bank. Rent it out. Build wealth slowly while someone else pays down your mortgage for you. Both of these paths have made regular people wealthy. Both have also led people straight into regret. And the argument over which one actually puts more money in your pocket over the long run is one of the most debated topics in all of personal finance. This video is going to settle it, using real numbers, real math, and every single cost included, not just the parts that make each side look good. Subscribe right now, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which choice wins. And the honest answer is more complicated than either side usually admits. Let's start with the longest possible view. A group of economists, Jordan, Schulerich, and Taylor, published research in 2017 studying investment returns across 16 countries. Going back to 1870, that's 150 years of real data. And the results ended many arguments. Over that entire long stretch of time, housing and stocks produced almost identical returns, roughly 6 to 7% per year, once you remove inflation from the math. These figures reflect unleveraged returns, meaning no mortgage or borrowed money involved on the housing side. That's the real starting point of this whole debate. Everything else in this argument is really about how each asset gets there and what it actually costs you to get there. The stock market, the case for doing nothing. The S&P 500, the index that tracks the 500 largest public companies in America, has returned about 10% per year on average over the last century. Through the Great Depression, both world wars, the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, and the pandemic. Here's what that looks like in real life. $100,000 invested in an S&P 500 index fund back in 1994 would be worth around $1.75 million today. You did nothing. You made zero decisions. You just put the money in and left it alone. That's the single most powerful part of stock market investing. A low-cost index fund charging around 0.03 to 0.10% a year gives you access to the performance of the entire American economy. But the cost of that simplicity is mental, not financial. In 2008, the S&P 500 lost 38% of its value in a single year. In early 2020, it dropped 34% in just 33 days. These crashes are temporary. History shows they always eventually recover. But living through one is genuinely hard. Many investors panic, sell at the bottom, and miss the recovery that follows. The math behind index investing is simple. There's also liquidity to consider. You can sell a stock in seconds and the cash lands in your account within a couple of business days. Real estate cannot offer that. Selling a property takes 30 to 90 days on average in a healthy market and much longer in a slow one. You also can't sell part of a property the way you can sell part of a stock portfolio. Here's where real estate makes its strongest argument, and it comes down to one word: leverage. The Case-Shiller Home Price Index shows U.S. home prices rising by about 3 to 5% per year on average, weaker than the stock market's 10%. But that comparison misses something important. With stocks, you invest $100,000 and own exactly $100,000 worth of stock. With real estate, you invest that same $100,000 as a down payment and end up owning a $500,000 property. If that property rises in value by 5%, it's now worth $525,000. Your gain is $25,000. On a $100,000 investment, a 25% return. That's leverage in action, and it's the real engine behind most real estate wealth. But leverage is a double-edged sword, and it cuts just as hard in the other direction. If that same $500,000 property fell by 10% instead, you would lose $50,000 in property value, which is half of your original $100,000 equity, wiped out from a price move most homeowners would consider fairly moderate. Now consider rental income. If your $500,000 property rents for $2,500 a month, that's $30,000 a year coming in. A $400,000 mortgage at 6.5% over 30 years actually costs about $2,528 a month in principal and interest alone. That means the rent in this example doesn't fully cover even the mortgage payment on its own. Before property taxes, insurance, maintenance, or vacancy are added in at all. Over time, the mortgage balance shrinks, the property value can climb, and rent can be raised. But that doesn't mean your investment is protected. Because of leverage, your equity, the part you actually own, can still be wiped out completely if prices fall far enough, even while the property itself retains real value. That leverage math looks powerful. Here's everything it leaves out. Mortgage interest. At $2,528 a month, a $400,000 mortgage at 6.5% costs roughly $25,700 in interest in the first year alone. Across the full 30-year loan, total interest adds up to around $510,000. You borrowed $400,000 and will pay back over $900,000. Property taxes. The average U.S. effective property tax rate is around 1.1% of a home's value a year. On a $500,000 property, that's $5,500 a year, every year. Maintenance and repairs. Budget 1 to 2% of property value annually. $5,000 to $10,000 a year on a $500,000 property. This isn't optional. Roofs wear out, appliances break, plumbing fails eventually. Vacancy. The average vacancy rate sits around 5 to 8% per year, roughly a month with no tenant paying rent while your mortgage still shows up on schedule. Buying and selling costs. Real estate is also expensive to trade. Agent commissions typically run 5 to 6% of the sale price, plus closing costs, transfer taxes, and inspection fees on top of that. On a $500,000 property, that can mean $30,000 or more disappearing the moment you sell. A cost stock investors essentially never face. Add all of these together, and they eat up a serious chunk of both the rental income and the leveraged returns that made real estate look so attractive in the first place. Time. The cost nobody talks about. Investing in an index fund takes about 1 hour a year. Owning a rental property is a completely different commitment. Tenant screening, lease agreements, rent collection, maintenance requests, emergency repairs, late payments, renewals, and constant paperwork. A self-managed rental typically demands 5 to 10 hours a month in a quiet month, and significantly more during turnovers or repairs. Over a decade, that's 600 to 1,200 hours of your life. If those hours went into a side business or extra work instead, any honest comparison has to include what your own time is worth to you. Diversification. One asset versus hundreds. There's one more difference worth naming clearly. A single S&P 500 index fund spreads your $100,000 across roughly 500 different companies in dozens of industries and regions. If one company struggles, it barely moves the needle. A single rental property does the opposite. It concentrates your entire investment into one building, in one neighborhood, exposed to one local job market, one local economy, and one set of local risks. A factory closing nearby or a new flood zone designation can hit that one property hard, in a way no single stock could touch an entire index fund. Taxes, where these two assets really diverge. In the U.S., long-term capital gains on stocks held over a year are taxed at 0, 15, or 20% depending on income, and you only trigger a taxable gain when you actually sell. Real estate has its own tax advantages. In many cases, mortgage interest and property taxes are deductible, and depreciation can lower your taxable rental income even while the property itself rises in value. But depreciation only applies to the building, not the land underneath it, since land doesn't wear out. If, for example, $100,000 of a $500,000 property's value is land and $400,000 is the building, only that $400,000 depreciable portion is spread over 27.5 years. Creating an annual deduction of roughly $14,500, not $18,000. These tax treatments depend heavily on the specific property, how it's used, your income level, and your filing situation. So this isn't blanket advice. It's a general pattern that a tax professional can apply to your actual numbers. Real estate's advantages are simply more complicated to access than stock investing's. The honest side-by-side comparison, after including every cost and every benefit, what does the real comparison look like? The well-documented academic data, the same Jordahl, Schulerich, and Taylor study cited earlier, shows unleveraged housing and equity returns sitting close together, both around 6 to 7% real return over 150 years. Once you apply the kind of mortgage leverage shown earlier in this video, a well-run rental property can outperform that baseline in good years, and underperform it badly in bad ones. There isn't a single clean, universally agreed upon number for leveraged housing returns, because it depends entirely on your specific loan, location, and costs. That's precisely why this video walked through the real math individually, rather than quoting one tidy statistic. What we can say with confidence is that real estate delivers more volatile, leverage-dependent outcomes, while stocks deliver more consistent, diversified ones. An investor who genuinely cannot handle watching their portfolio drop 30% in a year and ends up selling at the bottom out of panic will often do better in real estate in practice. Someone with no time for active management who values quick access to their money and broad diversification will almost always be better served by a steady index fund strategy. So the honest answer to which one makes you more money isn't simply real estate. It isn't simply stocks either. The real answer is whichever one you'll actually stick with for decades, without panic selling during a crash, without overmanaging every decision, and without letting hidden costs quietly eat away at your returns. Stocks tend to work best when you're disciplined, hands-off, and prioritize simplicity. Real estate tends to work best if you're genuinely willing to put in the work, use leverage wisely, and manage your costs carefully over time. Both paths have created real generational wealth. Both have also destroyed wealth when used without discipline or understanding. So the real question was never which asset is objectively better. It's simply this: which one actually fits the kind of investor you really are? Drop a comment with which path you're currently on or which one you're seriously considering. And subscribe, because data-driven breakdowns like this one are exactly the kind of content this channel exists to deliver, honestly and completely. This video is for general information only and isn't personal financial advice. Always consider your own situation or talk to a qualified financial professional before making any investment decision.